In a previous lecture we talked about a market and said that in every market there are two sides to a market. There's a buying side, demand, and a selling side, supply. In this lecture we want to talk about the supply, or the supply side of a market, or specifically about sellers. And let's start off with a definition of supply. Supply refers to the willingness and ability of sellers to produce and offer to sell different quantities of a good at different prices during a specific time period. Now let's focus in on that word willingness and ability. Ability refers to the fact that an individual can produce a good. So if I have the ability to produce chairs, we're saying that I'm able to produce chairs. And I have to have ability before I'm going to supply chairs. Willingness means that I actually want to do this. All right? In other words, I want to not only produce these chairs but offer them for sale. So for example, I could have the ability to produce computers but not have the willingness to produce computers. If that's the case, I'm not supplying computers. In other words, I say I can do it, but I don't really want to do it. So I don't do it. I don't produce and offer to sell chairs. It takes both of these before we can say that I supply some good or service. Now, with respect to supply, there is what we call the law of supply. Just as when we talked about demand in a previous lecture, there was a law of demand. There's a law of supply when we talk about supply. And the law of supply speaks to a relationship between two variables, price and quantity supplied. And specifically it says that these two variables are directly related. What that means is that they move in the same direction. They both go up together, they both come down together. Or let's put it in terms that we can understand and are consistent with what we've talked about before in other lectures. As the price of the good goes up, the quantity supplied of the good goes up. In other words, notice that price and quantity supplied are both moving up. It's not that one is moving up and the other is moving down. Similarly, as the price of a good goes down, the quantity supplied of that good goes down. Right? So the law of supply, which is right here in terms of what I'm circling right now, is stating a relationship, specifically a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So let's put it in terms of an example. As the price of chairs goes up, it says that the sellers of chairs want to produce more chairs and offer more chairs for sale. As the price of chairs falls, it says that the producers of chairs want to produce fewer and offer fewer chairs for sale. Now we can take this law of supply and look at it in terms of numbers, and if we do, what we're doing is constructing a supply schedule. So this table that you see before you is a supply schedule. And the supply schedule represents the law of supply here, given our numbers. It says that if the price of a good is, let's say, $10, the quantity supplied is 100. But if the price rises, let's say, to $12, right? Price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. That's our law of supply. And if the price goes up again, let's say to $14, again, quantity supplied goes up from 130 to 150. All right? So what we see before us here is the law of supply in numbers. We can represent the law of supplies graphically in the following way. Let's look at a two-dimensional diagram. We'll put QS for quantity supplied on the horizontal axis and P for price on the vertical axis. We'll pick a price, let's say $1, and have that go along with a quantity supplied of 10. And we'll call that point A. Now we'll raise price to, let's say, $2 And we know that that $2, if we're trying to represent the law of supply, has to go along with a larger number for quantity supplied. That's 20. We'll represent that point by point B. We'll draw a line through those 2 points, and we have a supply curve. We usually represent the supply curve by capital S at the end of the curve. So here we have a supply curve. And does that supply curve represent the law of supply? Well, sure it does, because it tells us that as we raise the price of the good, the quantity supplied goes up. Or if we lower the price of the good, the quantity supplied of the good goes down. That is, price and quantity supplied move in the same direction. Now, the curve that you just saw was an upward sloping supply curve. Let's go back to that for a second. Right? That supply curve that you see on your screen is upward sloping, left to right. There are some supply curves that are vertical. Right? So what do we mean by a vertical supply curve? We mean a supply curve that looks like this. Again, here's quantity supplied and here's price. And here is a vertical supply curve, all right, at, let's say, quantity 12, quantity supplied 12. Now, that supply curve does not represent the law of supply, because the law of supply says that as price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. And that's not what that supply curve says. This supply curve says the following. As price goes up, let's say, from $1 to $2, quantity supplied stays the same. In other words, at $1 the quantity supplied is 12, and at $2 the quantity supplied is 12. So what we have in this picture is P going up or P going down and quantity supplied staying constant. We put a bar over quantity supplied to represent it not changing or it being constant. Now, while that supply curve does not represent the law of supply, there are supply curves in the real world that can be represented by that vertical supply curve. In other words, there are supply conditions in the real world that can be represented by that supply curve. Now, when would you have a supply curve that looks like that? Well, one time that you might have that is when there is not enough time to produce more of a good. Let's suppose you're dealing with good X here. And we'll just assume that over the next 10 minutes the price of good goes up, price of good X goes up from $1 to $2. Well, it may be that it's going to take more than just a couple of minutes to produce more of good X. So the supply curve of good X over the next 5 minutes, over the next 10 minutes, over the next hour, maybe over the next day or month, depending upon how long it takes to produce more units of good X, the supply curve is vertical. In other words, that supply curve says that as price goes up, quantity supplied is not changing, because the time period may be so short that you can't actually produce more units of this good given the time period that we're looking at. So for example, we're talking about, let's say, computers. It takes some time to produce additional computers. So the supply curve of computers over the next hour may be vertical. Or talk about houses. It takes more time to produce more houses. So the supply curve of houses over the next hour, over the next day, may be vertical. Now there's another reason that you can have a vertical supply curve, and that is because you can't produce more of the good no matter how much more time you have. Think of a good like Van Gogh paintings. Well, Van Gogh is dead. But it could very well be that the price of Van Gogh paintings goes up, and we can't, as a result of Van Gogh being dead, bring about any more Van Gogh paintings, or at least not genuine, real Van Gogh paintings. There could be fakes, but not real, genuine Van Gogh paintings painted by Van Gogh. So the supply curve of Van Gogh paintings is vertical because we cannot produce more no matter how much more time we have. So even if price goes up from $1 million to $2 million to $3 million for a Van Gogh painting, it's impossible to produce more genuine, real Van Gogh paintings as that price goes up. Now, we've talked about two terms here. We've used two terms in our discussion, supply and quantity supplied. And we want to make sure that we understand the difference between those two, because many people will say that these two words sound alike, supply and quantity supplied, and therefore say that these two mean the same thing. Well, they do not. Once again, supply and quantity supplied do not mean or refer to the same thing. If you go back to our earlier definition of supply, it talked about the willingness and ability to produce and offer to sell different quantities at different prices. Well, what you see in this supply schedule in front of you is different prices, $10, $12, $14, and different quantities, 100, 130, 150. This whole thing that I'm circling now is what we mean by supply. We're talking about different quantities being produced and offered for sale at different prices. Emphasis plural. Now, quantity supplied is a number, a specific number of units of a good that sellers are willing and able to produce at a given price. So let's point to a specific number. Well, 100 is a specific number. That's the quantity supplied of this good at this particular price, $10. Well, what's another quantity supplied? Well, here's another specific number. That's the quantity supplied of this good at this particular price, $12. And finally, 150 is quantity supplied. That's a specific number of units that good sellers are willing and able to produce at this particular price. All right. So again, supply refers to different quantities at different prices. But quantity supplied is just a specific number referring to a specific number of units that goods of a good that sellers are willing and able to produce at a given price. Well, let's summarize. Let's talk about the law of supply again. What does the law of supply say? It says that there's a relationship between price and quantity supplied. What type of relationship? A direct relationship. In other words, as the price of a good goes up, the quantity supplied of that good goes up. As the price of the good goes down, the quantity supplied of that good goes down. We also talked about upward sloping and vertical supply curves. Here is a picture of an upward sloping supply curve. Here is a picture of a vertical supply curve. Which one of the two supply curves, 1 or 2, represents the law of supply? And the answer is 1. The law of supply says that there's a direct relationship between P and QS, that as P goes up, QS goes up, and as P goes down, QS goes down. And that's what the first diagram shows, the upward sloping supply curve. The vertical supply curve does not represent the law of supply, because for the vertical supply curve here, it's the case that P goes up or down and QS is constant. In reality, some supply curves look like 1, and some supply curves look like 2. Again, with respect to 2, supply curves can look like that if the producer doesn't have enough time to produce more units of the good as price goes up. Or it can look like that, the vertical supply curve, if we're talking about a good that can't be produced any longer. Supply and quantity supplied. What does supply refer to? Well, different prices, $10, $12, $14, and different quantities supplied, 100, 120, 140. that whole thing is supply. Quantity supplied refers to a specific number. This is quantity supplied 100. It refers to a specific number of units that sellers are willing and able to produce and offer to sell at a given price. 100 is the quantity supplied that goes along with $10. Here's another quantity supplied, 120. That's a specific number. Here's another quantity supplied, 140. Well, let's ask some questions now. Let's draw the supply curve of houses in city X during the next hour. All right? The next hour is the key here. So we'll put quantity of houses here on the horizontal axis, or quantity supplied of houses, and we'll put P for the price of houses, PH let's say, for the price of houses, and we're looking at the supply curve of houses in city X during the next hour. Well, suppose the price of houses goes up in the next hour from, let's say, PH1 to PH2. Is the quantity supplied of houses going to be able to respond to that within the next hour? Well, if we're talking about producing and offering to sell more houses, 1 hour is not enough time to bring about that quantity supplied response. So it's very likely that the case of the supply of houses, all right, the supply of houses at SH is vertical at whatever number of houses exists at this point in time on the market for sale. Let's go to another question. Draw the supply curve of houses in city X over the next 2 years. All right, notice our time period is different now. So we've got quantity of houses here, price of houses. All right. And so if the price of houses goes up from PH1 to PH2, is it possible to produce more houses at PH2 than PH1 if we're talking about a period of 2 years? Well, yes, we can definitely produce more houses in a period of 2 years. It doesn't take that long to produce houses, but certainly 2 years gives us enough time. So our supply curve of houses would look like that if we're looking at a period of time of 2 years.